this is something which is useful, especially when we get into conflictual situations in our lives, because there's this dichotomy of being a human. There's this, we're very much connected to each other, but we're also very much individuals. So from there arises conflicts. So the modality, the premise of nonviolent communication, which you can also call conscious communication, or the name of it isn't really that important. The modality is that the premise is that we all have the same needs. So we have universal needs, things that we have in common with each other. You might be aware of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and there's been a lot of work done on human needs, and we're aware of them ourselves. Just from when you feel thirsty, you need water. When you feel hungry, you need food. When it's raining, you need somewhere to shelter. And these are our basic needs, and our needs basically grow and grow and grow as we grow as people. And it's not always clear how we are trying to get our needs met. So sometimes when someone is, if you can imagine a baby who's crying in frustration, they're literally experiencing a type of anger and hurt because they have a need to usually eat or defecate, or they're too hot or they're too cold. They're not actually fully aware of their need, but the parents are aware of their needs. So by meeting their need, by cleaning their nappy or giving them water or food or whatever it is that you can see they need, then that emotion, that frustration, that hurt, it subsides, and they move back into a state of natural being or joy. And this dynamic progresses through life as we get older and older, and our lives become more complex. But our needs are the source of our emotions. So when our needs are met, we are calm and in a natural state of being, which is one of joy and serenity. And when our needs are not being met, we are often in a state of agitation, which can manifest in all sorts of negative emotions. So the premise of nonviolent communication is that we have needs, and whether these needs are met or not dictates how our emotional state will be. So the premise that I would invite you to entertain is that we have universal needs, and the way we choose to get those needs met can either make our lives serene and joyous, or they can make them conflictual and painful. That's the premise, and I would invite you to entertain that idea and test it out in a scientific manner. See if it works for you. The way that if you guys choose to investigate how nonviolent communication can work and become conversational in its process, then you can make a decision as to whether it's a tool that you want to use in your life or not. There are certain lines which all humans will respect. And in that sense, humans are equal, or we call that egalitarianism. So when you're looking at needs, each individual has their own needs. And if someone is wanting to impose a strategy or some way of getting their needs met on the other person, then this is often the cause of conflict. Because the main premise, so the first premise is that we have universal needs, that if our needs are met, we feel good. If our needs are not met, we experience negative emotion or some type of agitation. The second premise is that we are individuals and that we voluntarily interact with others. And that to me is the idea of staying within one's own energy. And this is the idea of it's the idea of the free market in a sense. It's like if you want an ice cream and the ice cream shop's shut, you go to another ice cream shop. It's the idea of needs and hierarchy is very clear when you look in relation to a baby or a small child or even a teenager. As you launch into adulthood, work, romantic, family, friendships. Friendships is a good example because people are naturally drawn to each other who meet each other's needs. So the first premise is that we have emotional, is that we have universal needs, which when they're met, we feel good. When they're not met, we don't feel good. The second premise is that we voluntarily interact with one another. And that process, as Alison pointed out, is a way of prioritizing needs. For example, many homeless people will prioritize, homeless people who are living on the street will prioritize community over shelter. They have a need for shelter, and yet they have more of their need for community is more important, and therefore they will live on the street in a place where there are other people where they feel a connection with. Yeah. So we have this prioritizing of needs. How to get those needs met is basically going within yourself and understanding what they are, and then strategizing ways to facilitate them happening. So, you know, you're feeling thirsty, you go and drink some water. The second premise is that you voluntarily offer, you make requests. To put it in a clearer way, you have two parties, for example, who have very different views of why there's a conflict.
Yeah.
If you speak to one party, then they'll give you one story. You speak to another, you hear another. So the question becomes, where's the truth? Yeah. At that point there, you can either choose to side with one or the other. And if that happens on a very large scale, you have what's called a war. You have what's called an argument, which generally in an argument, there is no winner. Even when it appears that one side wins, what ends up happening is the winner, the so-called winner, becomes elevated to a state of, they're either getting their need met through fear or through violence, which in the end separates them from the person or people that they wanted to be connected to in the first place. And you can say that it's a no-win situation. Yeah. So the idea of conscious communication is to understand that we have needs and that sometimes they're not fully conscious, and that it's a process to work out how needs can be met in a cooperative way. I mean, often, you know, I was a teacher for a long time, and it always seemed so strange to me that the school systems would inflict tests on students every week continually, where you had a fixed amount of time on your own to answer questions. When as soon as they were out of school and they'd be working in companies which were trying to achieve something, they'd be working in groups. And when they're in the real world, in a company or whatever job they're doing, they're cooperating with one another. And that's you know, a very important dichotomy in conscious communication, is this idea of competition versus cooperation. If you're in cooperation, you're looking at a way to create a situation which is win-win.
Well, that's true.
So the process of conscious communication is recognizing needs and then negotiating how everyone can get their needs met. You may realize that you have a need for solitude, for example. If someone realizes to have a need for solitude, then a classic way of getting that need met without expressing anything is to go for a walk. You can even suggest to your partner or your family or whoever, whatever group, they say, I need to go and get some fresh air, I'm going to go for a walk. Would you like some company? Actually, I prefer to go on my own. They go for a walk, their need for solitude is being met, and the emotions will subside, whatever they were. That's you know, we do these things naturally in a mutually beneficial way most of the time, to be fair. It's just sometimes there's conflicts which arise, and these conflicts arise from a misunderstanding of what the other person is thinking or feeling. We often impose what Marshall Rosenberg would call enemy images on what's happening. So people will often feel, feel in inverted commas, neglected, for example. When someone feels neglected, you automatically become the victim. If there's a victim, there's a perpetrator, and therein begins the conflict. This may be something that's perceived and not expressed, which means it will grow, or it may be something that's expressed and then negated, which means that there will be an argument, and then the argument creates anger energy or fear energy, and then the brain starts to work less and things just tend to get worse. So when we bring it back to recognizing what our needs are and then expressing those needs in a form of a request, then the other person is able to either fulfill that need or politely decline. One of the pillars of this modality is that we are free human beings with a voluntary, who can interact voluntarily with each other in a cooperative manner. There's no right or wrong. You may choose, for example, you see in children in the playground, they choose not to share their games. No, I'm not playing marbles, they're my marbles. There's very much this idea of mine. And then they realize that it's no fun having all the marbles and no one to play with. So as this happens, maybe they don't share their marbles 3 or 4 times and they have tantrums and get angry. And then the 5th time they start thinking, maybe if I share my marbles, my need for play will be met. And they experiment and they try it, and sure enough, their need for play is being met. And then the next time they're more than happy to share their marbles to a certain point. When you have a conflictual situation, you bring in the idea of observing. So we try to objectively observe what's happening in a way that everyone will agree that the description of what happened is a good description. And this involves eliminating words which have what's the word I'm looking for? Meanings which can be interpreted in different ways. So, for example, you can, in the process of coming to an objective understanding of what's happened in a certain situation, it may take quite a long time to actually come to the correct terminology for that. We will avoid words such as words which assign blame, words which denote victimhood. We literally try to explain in objective language